Bum, 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 bum. Ba, 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 bow, bow. Bow, 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 bow. Ba. Yes, that's the theme song for your favorite part of the day. It's called Coffee with Scott Adams. And those of you who are here early, you're going to get an extra special bonus. It's called the simultaneous sip, and you're here to enjoy it. Doesn't take much to enjoy it. You don't have to be that prepared, but you have to be a little bit prepared. What do you need? Well, let me tell you. You need a cup or a mug or a glass, a stein, a chalice, a tankard, a thermos, a flask, a canteen, or a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit that makes everything better, the high point of your day before it even gets even better, the simultaneous sip. It happens now. Ah, so good. I feel that coffee coursing through my veins. Row, row, row. Okay, you didn't need to see that. All right, here's my favorite tweet of the day from Liz Wheeler of OAN. So this is her tweet. I've been laughing about it this morning. Let's see if I can read it without laughing. She goes, "Man, what an awesome day for Trump. First, he forces Dems to embrace anti-Semites, Omar and Tlaib. Then he tells a fat protester at his rally to go home and start exercising. And obs, meaning obviously, and obs, he's trying to buy Greenland. If you don't think this is awesome, I don't know how to talk to you." And what's funny is I immediately know that we could easily talk because I do think that's kind of awesome. Now, as I've said before, making fun of people's weight is a very bad look, especially in this country, because I think 60% of adults are overweight or something. But somehow when Trump does it, because he's got a few pounds of his own, so somehow when he does it, it doesn't seem the same. If if a fat guy calls you fat, it's not really the same, right? Let's admit it's just not the same as if somebody skinny calls you fat. That's pretty funny. I've been working on a brain hack to cure bigotry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about some of the headlines, which are awesome. All right. What great headlines we have. We have to talk about Greenland, right? So I was watching CNN cover the story that President Trump has floated the idea with his aides, and his aides have looked into it, of actually buying Greenland. Now, I guess there are 58,000 residents. It's some kind of associated with Denmark. I don't know exactly their political affiliation. They're sort of a protectorate of some sort. And apparently the idea has been floated before. I think Truman thought about it, etc. So for geopolitical reasons, if you look at a map, I had to remind myself, I obviously I knew generally where Greenland was, but I wanted to actually refresh my memory by seeing it on the globe. Don't look on a flat like map. Look on one that's, got some three dimensions. Because if you see where it is, you say to yourself, "Oh crap, we do need to have control of that little piece of real estate because it's sort of central to what probably will be some kind of a fight for the North Pole and its resources and its shipping lanes and all that. And it would be nice to have, a lot of control up in that area for strategic purposes." But here's the funny part. So CNN's doing one of these four screens at the same time situations where they've got the various panelists. And I'm watching one of the anti-Trumpers' faces and reactions as the story is being described. And this is how they start the story. It's like, the president's thinking about buying Greenland. Now, what's wrong with buying Greenland? Nothing. It's actually smart, strategic. If Greenland said yes, it would be very doable, practical, strategic, affordable, smart. How did the CNN pundits react to floating an idea that might not happen, but it's clearly strategic, smart, doable, and very affordable, probably. How did they react? Let me do my impression that those of you listening on the podcast will not get to appreciate. But here is one of the women, one of the anti-Trumpers. This is her face. That's it. She just makes this grimaced face, like a mocking smile, like, oh, boy, in Greenland, oh, I just shake my head at the stupidity of it. Oh, I don't have any words that I could use to say why it's a bad idea, because it's actually a totally reasonable idea to float. They might say no, but it's certainly worth asking. I don't have anything bad to say about it. So I'll just smile like I'm in pain and shake my head. Meanwhile, one of the other pundits who's trying to laugh it off, oh, well, actually, but didn't want to look like a complete idiot, describes how strategically sound it is as at least something to consider. It was hilarious watching them so biologically primed to disagree, but just didn't have anything. This is the greatest story ever, because they didn't have anything. Now, here's the other great part about it. I'm going to assume it's not going to happen, but it might. It might. But I'm going to assume it won't. But wasn't it kind of brilliant if Trump had anything to do with this story surfacing, or anybody in Trump's circle had anything to do with surfacing the story? It's really brilliant. It's a brilliant story to surface as a story. Because when you think of the greatest presidents, you think of ones that added territory, right? You think of Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, and just the idea that the United States could substantially increase its real estate holdings in this hemisphere. I mean, really substantially. At the same time, it might be getting warmer. Hey, what if it gets warmer? Greenland's looking pretty good if it gets warmer, doesn't it? So it's a play, it's a hedge for global warming. It's got some uranium, it's got some other natural resources and all that. It kind of makes Trump look like a big thinker, because that's exactly what it is. It's big thinking. It is sort of Trump's trademark that he thinks bigger than other people. He said that expressly, by the way. I think in The Art of the Deal, he talks about there's no point in having a small idea. Nobody cares about a small idea. So he has big ones. How about instead of North Korea, doesn't nuke us, how about we become friends and help them build up their country? Like, that's big. Thinks big. So the Greenland thing is just a wonderful story to have out there floating around. It's all good, even if it doesn't happen. It makes you think that the president's a big thinker, which he is. I watched, and here's a question I have about Greenland. How does Greenland defend itself? 58,000 people, giant country, sort of a little bit too close to Russia, maybe a little too close to China. How do they defend themselves? Is it the Danes? Do they wait for Denmark to come protect them if Russia attacks? I don't think so. Yeah, I think that they depend on U.S. forces primarily. Now, if you depend entirely on the United States to defend you, are you a sovereign country? Kind of. I mean, you get to decide who's the mayor and who picks up the trash. But if another country is your national defense, I mean, I'm assuming that's true just based on geography. I don't know anything about the defense situation there, but I'm kind of assuming it's true. If you depend on another country for your defense, are you a sovereign country? Interesting question. Somebody says Norway. I don't know. But there's nobody who's protecting against Russia except the United States, I would think, and NATO being an extension of the United States in this context. All right. I saw Stephen Colbert do an interview with Anderson Cooper, and he said a surprising thing. He said, "We don't know anything about Trump." He said that there are all these big holes, and we don't even know who he is because we don't have his school grades and we don't have his taxes. And I thought to myself, is there anybody we know more about than Trump? And this guy who's a critic says we don't know anything about Trump. Name a public figure that we know more about. I mean, doesn't that just strike you as a crazy comment? That's not a comment you can, it's not just a agree, disagree kind of a comment. It's like, oh, I have different facts or different opinion or something. To say that we don't know anything about Trump, meaning that he's more of a mystery than other public figures, feels like exactly the opposite of what I'm watching. I feel like we know more about this guy than anybody we've ever seen in public life. So it's amazing, two movies on one screen situation. In other news, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's, I guess, arranger, allegedly, has been spotted at an In-N-Out Burger reading a book about CIA people who died. How perfect is that? Ghislaine is reading a book about CIA agents being killed. Coincidence? Have you ever imagined that a foreign intelligence service, or even a domestic one, might have an interest in somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who in turn had a lot of information about a lot of other foreign leaders? Feels to me that the CIA would want to be friends with a guy like Epstein, just to take advantage of his blackmail operation. They might want to use it for themselves and say, hey, Jeff, can you do us a solid? Can you get this foreign leader to just visit your island? That's all we need from you. Yeah. So, I wonder if that was a coincidence she was reading that book, or was she sending a message? All right. I tweeted the following tweet. Don Jr. retweeted it, so it's getting a lot of attention. I said, question, if Trump's rhetoric is so dangerous, that's like all the headlines, right? Trump's rhetoric is so dangerous. I said, if Trump's rhetoric is so dangerous, why does the news have to lie about what he says to make it sound bad? Wouldn't it sound bad all by itself? Now, of course, you know that I'm making people think past the sale a little bit here. And think past the sale of, do they change his words to make them sound bad? And the answer is, of course, yes. And when people are challenging me on it, I'm watching in my Twitter feed as people challenge me. What do you think they say when I say, why do you have to change Trump's words to make it sound bad? Doesn't it sound bad all on its own? What do his critics say? They say, Dale, Dale, could you come over here? What do the president's critics say when I say, why do they have to change his words to make it sound bad? Shouldn't it sound bad all by itself if his rhetoric is bad? What do they say, Dale? They say, they're bad all by themselves. His words are bad all by themselves. I see them with my own eyes and my own ears. They're all bad by themselves. See? And so then I'm watching people come into my Twitter feed, and when people say, no, his words really are bad, I send them either a link to my blog post about why only the Democrats hear a secret dog whistle, where I compare all these alleged stories of Trump's badness, rhetorical badness anyway, and I describe how it looks different from both sides. But also people are sending links to the Fine People hoax debunking, which is the classic one where they changed his words to make it sound bad. So I'm using it as an opportunity to get out the word about the Fine People hoax, which I think is finally, thanks to Steve Cortez especially, and Joel Pollack for really putting a stake in that hoax. It will live forever, but at least now the record is clear enough that if you Googled Fine People hoax, you would see the debunking. There's another story in the Don Lemon, I don't know what you'd call it, situation. I don't think it would be an assault. What would you call it? So the allegation is that there was some, I think, bartender off duty in some other bar, and he approached Don Lemon in a bar, and it was very late, and people were drinking, and Don Lemon came up to him later, and I'm not going to describe what what is alleged that Don Lemon said or did. You could read about it if you want. But I'm going to defend Don Lemon here. You ready? So the news part of the story is that there was a witness. So there was actually somebody with the bartender who saw exactly what the bartender described. So it sounds, between the two of them, it sounds like an accurate description of what actually happened. Now the friend went away thinking that nothing happened. Think about that. The friend went away thinking that although he described exactly the same events, it didn't seem to have any importance to him. It didn't look like some kind of a sexual assault or anything. But apparently the bartender, who was the subject of it, is saying that it had a bigger effect on him. And even the other witness says, yes, that he did notice that it did seem to have a bigger effect on the bartender. That's subjective. But here's the thing. If you read about what actually happened, it's not like the guy grabbed it by the crotch or anything. So it wasn't a direct assault on somebody's, private parts. It was something kind of weird and gross and forward. But given that it was a man dealing with a man, and they were familiar with each other in a sense, wasn't complete strangers. They had at least had a small acquaintance, so they knew who the other was, essentially. Here was my take on it. I just don't know that this rises to the level of anything but two drunk guys talking. That's my take on it. Now, had one of the participants been a woman, I would feel differently. Because I don't think you can say that something that happens to a woman has the same impact as something that happens to a man. The fact that Don Lemon is gay, I don't think that changes the fact that the subject of the encounter was a male. All right? If a gay guy comes on to me, whether I like it or don't like it, I probably would just be complimented. But I'm just not going to have like a world-changing experience out of that. I might get a story out of it, but I don't think it's going to change my life in any way. Yeah. Now, those who say that gender doesn't matter, and I don't think anybody says that, there's nobody serious who says gender doesn't matter in these situations, because it does matter. It matters a lot. So maybe what Don Lemon did was, creepy and weird, but that's what drunk people do. If you go to a bar, and this wasn't even a regular bar, this was a late night bar where people go to this bar after the other bars close. I mean, it's the super drunk bar. If you go to the super drunk bar where people are going to be super drunk because it's that late at night, there's going to be guys doing drunk stuff in the bar. Now, if you're a woman, it's illegal, and you've got a case, and leave the woman alone. But if it's a guy, mostly talking to a guy, saying something that's not that palatable, I don't know, not the worst thing in the world. So I hate to disappoint you by siding with Don Lemon on this, but I got to say that I just don't see any jury having a problem with this as a crime. I don't see it as a crime. It doesn't rise to that. Even if everything that's said about it is true, it just doesn't rise to a level of crime, in my opinion. But read about it yourself. Form your own opinion. All right. One of the things, so President Trump did two things yesterday that I thought were so clever, and I don't think he gets enough credit for. The Greenland thing is one I talked about, but he's going after Omar and Tlaib about this visit to Israel or the West Bank. And I'm a little confused. I think at first they were going to go, and then the president talked to somebody in Israel, and then Israel changed their mind and said, no, these two are backing the boycott against Israel, so you can't come. And then I think maybe there's some kind of exclusion for Tlaib because of a relative, visiting a relative. So I don't know, it's in flux right now. But here's what's great about it. Every time Trump talks about this, he forces the media to talk about it. They don't have a choice. It's just the characters involved are just too interesting, too important. It's the president, it's half of the squad. Can't not talk about it. And every time they talk about this, it's good for the president. And they hate that. Because the worst thing they can say about this is that he's being political as opposed to, being presidential. And when his supporters look at it, what do you think they say? Yeah, he's just being political instead of being presidential. The worst thing you can say about it, his own supporters would say, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, this is political. That's all it is. It's just political. Do we hate it? No, we don't hate it because it's kind of funny, first of all. I don't think you can separate from the fact that it's kind of funny. I kind of love it. Yeah, somebody says I love it. I would, it's kind of funny. It's very much like when he canceled the airplane ride for Pelosi and her crew. It's just kind of funny. It's just something he can do, so he does do it. It's not the end of the world. Nobody dies because of it. Nobody loses money because of it. It's just sort of a dick move, but it's really effective. I can't hate something, and honestly, I'm pretty sure I would say this if somebody I didn't like was doing it to somebody I liked. I think I would still appreciate how clever this is. It's very clever for the president to put the spotlight on him, and here's the super clever part. He does this by explicitly accusing them of racism and anti-Semitism. And he says, quote, they hate Israel and all Jewish people. Now, is that in evidence? Is there any evidence that we could look to and say, oh yeah, there's the proof. They hate Israel and all Jewish people. No, no, there's not. I mean, that might be your opinion, but I would bet that if you talked to them and said, all right, here's your truth serum. Do you hate every Jewish person? They wouldn't say yes. Of course not. Even no matter what bad feelings they have about Israel in general, I don't think in their souls you could find them to say that they hate all Jewish people. I just don't think so. Now, are they doing things which all Jewish people might find distasteful? I say all. There's no such thing as everybody agreeing on anything. But are they doing things which most Jewish people would observe and say, oh, I don't like that? Yeah, they're doing that. So the president is extending the criticism in exactly the way it's happening to him. So the most effective thing that the anti-Trumpers are doing are accusing him of racism because there is no defense against the accusation. It's the one thing you can't defend. Because if you're going into public and saying, I'm not a racist, you're losing. Let's say you say, I'm not a racist and here's my good evidence. You're still losing. If that's what you're talking about, you're losing. And so Trump has finally found a way to get out of that box, because you can't get out of the box if so many people are accusing you of being in that little racist box. There's just nothing you can do. So instead, he found a very practical way to go on offense. So remember, the president was accused of backing those tiki torch people in Charlottesville, the neo-Nazis who were saying anti-Semitic chants. They were actually chanting, anti-Semitic things specifically. And that was like their primary message, it seemed. And now the president's going after Omar and Tlaib for being like those protesters. So he's basically lumping Omar and Tlaib. He's lumping them with the Charlottesville neo-Nazis. He's putting them in the same category, at least on the one question about Israel. And that makes them have to defend it. They're forced to defend the accusation, and they can't. They can't. Because nobody can defend an accusation of racism. It's the only indefensible thing. Maybe the accusations of sexism are right behind it. But you can't really defend against it. Every time you talk about it, you go deeper in the hole. So he decided that since he couldn't get out of his hole, he would dig a little hole for them. And now they're in the hole. And this is never going to go away. Omar and Tlaib will always be the anti-Semitic congresspeople. Now, whether it's true in the sense that that's what they're thinking in their mind, whether or not they separate Israeli politics from Israeli people, doesn't matter. If they're defending against this charge, they're losing. And it's branding the Democrats as hypocrites and racists. So that's pretty effective. So let's talk about hacking your brain. I saved something fun for the end. So I've been having this problem of trying to get out of the house, meaning that the simple process of getting in my car and driving somewhere is so difficult now that I end up being in a rage of anger before I've even started the car. Here's why. Here's a list of 11 things I have to remember to bring with me to go to the gym. All right, this is how our world has become complicated. If I want to go to the gym, here are the things I have to remember every time. I got to remember to put on some sunscreen, at least for my head and neck. I got to remember my hat, my earbuds, my wallet, my phone, my car keys. I like to bring a protein bar and my own water. They don't have good water at the gym. Sunglasses that are sometimes in the house. And a charger for my battery. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, leave some number of those things in the car. Now, I do have an extra hat, etc. But the number of times I can actually get out the door without having to go back in and get something has reduced to zero. 0 times I can walk out the door, get in the car, and drive away and be happy about it. 100% of the times, I get in the car and I go, oh, forgot my X, and I got to go back and get them. Now, you're right. I'm trying to improve my system so that the number of things I have to remember will shrink. Yeah, I see people suggesting keep them in the gym bag. Now, that would require doubling things. So I would need to double my prescription sunglasses. That's expensive. I would have to double my earbuds. That's expensive. I don't really have 2 wallets, but I suppose I could, have a extra credit card and some cash. So I could do that, and I will. But the first step was making the list. So if I can at least look at the list and do my inventory before I leave the house, at least it'll be one trip. So I used this yesterday for the first time, and let me tell you why I had to go to this. This is a simulation story. So the other day, I tried to put together all my things to go to the gym. I thought I had them all, and I was carrying them in like a little pile, like in my hand, and some of them were going to go in my gym bag and stuff before I actually pulled out of the garage. But I put them out, and I put them on the console of my car, in the middle console, and I said to myself, and I swear to God, there's no way you can verify this, but I swear to God, I said this in my mind. I said to myself, this was so complicated, but now I've got this. I have everything I need. I'm going to go to the gym. There's only one thing that could derail my plan of pulling into my garage and going to the gym. And I thought to myself, the only thing that could go wrong is if my car key slipped off the little pile on the middle console and by coincidence went directly into the crack between the seat and the console where I would not be able to find it. And I thought to myself, that's the only thing that could go wrong. And as I thought that, I looked out of the corner of my eyes and watched my key start to move. It moved across the top of my wallet, and it dove into that crack between the seat and the console, and I looked down, and it was unreachable. It was unreachable. So I abandoned my trip to the gym. I had flashlights and sticks, and I spent the next hour of my life trying to get that key out of the only place in the world it could have fallen where I could not easily get it out. I did eventually get it out, but by then time had gone by and I had no time to go to the gym. It was the next day that I created the checklist. Now I've added to my system, do not put things on the center console of car. So my new rule is I'm not going to set anything up there, period. I'm just not going to put anything on that console. Doesn't matter what it takes. I'll put it on the seat. I'll put it anywhere else, but I'll not put it on that center console. So the story is about systems versus goals. My goal was to go to the gym. My system of getting there wasn't working. So what I'm doing is I'm A/B testing myself toward a system that could work, that has the advantage of decreasing the amount of things I think about. Now take that simple process of going to the gym and the complexity that grew up around it. Now multiply by that by everything you do all day. Everything you do all day is super complicated now, just super complicated. And it just fills your day until you're exhausted and annoyed and you have mental illness, literally. And so that's a question on system. Now, if you're having trouble getting to the gym, by the way, this is what my book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, is about. It's about developing a system to help you do those things where just having a goal wasn't getting you there. You know, developing a daily thing you do so that you could get to your objective. So we'll talk about that another time, how to develop systems to get to the gym. But I wanted to run something by you. I wanted to run by you a system for deprogramming people from racism. That's weird. Oh, here it is. Do you think I could do that? Do you think I could create a system or a brain hack to deprogram bigotry? Think that's possible? I think it is. Now you'd have to A/B test it, but I'll tell you how I would start. Let's say you put me in a room. I'm a trained hypnotist, for those of you who don't know, and I've studied persuasion for decades. I've written about it for anybody who's new here. Could I rewire a racist's brain to be less racist? Do you think that could be done with a conversation? The answer is maybe. It's definitely in the realm of doable things, because we do observe that. In fact, there was just a story today in the news about somebody who was a neo-Nazi for decades and just decided that it was all just bunk and decided to renounce racism after decades of being a leader in some kind of a neo-Nazi group. And we know people change. We know people start out as racist and become less so. So could I talk somebody out of it in a short interview, shall we say? I think yes, and here's how I would approach it. Now, this could require a lot of repetition, so don't assume that just hearing this once makes a difference. But it would go like this. I would start by telling people, you know, you do understand that bigotry of all kinds, whether it's ethnic or age or gender, you realize that those are built into us. So I'd say to my bigot, I would say, you understand that you and I and everybody else is the same in this one regard, that racism is our default circuitry. And that makes sense. It makes sense that we're all bigots, because in the old days, back in our early human past, we didn't have information about other groups. And if you saw a tribe coming toward your tribe and they didn't look just like your people in whatever way, you had a threat. So any group of humans that didn't look like your group of humans was dangerous throughout most of human history. So you should not be embarrassed by the fact that your natural default circuitry is bigoted. because you evolved under, in a world in which that was a useful reflex. But things have changed. Today, we don't need to make decisions based on, gross, big visual things like ethnicity or looks or color or anything like that. Because we have social media, we have the internet. We can find out about a specific person to the point of being safe or not safe quite easily. So the utility of being a bigot, the usefulness of it, was really useful, a million years ago or 100,000 years ago. Let's say 100,000 years ago, was really useful. Today is more unuseful than useful because we can find out about individuals in a way we couldn't before. So first you get people you pace them. The worst thing you can do if you try to talk somebody out of bigotry is to say, you're a bigot and I'm not. If you start with that, you're done. No progress could be made. But if you say, there's one thing we all have in common. We all have default bigoted circuitry. Now, you don't believe that? Ask anybody you know if they have mating preferences by ethnicity and gender. Ask people if they have a preferred gender they would like to mate with, and do they have a preferred ethnicity that they like or don't like. I've never met anybody, no matter how good they were, as humans, no matter how unprejudiced they were, I've never met anybody in private who didn't have a strong preference about who they wanted to mate with. Now, it's not all bigotry in the way that you imagine. For example, I have two people I knew quite well, two women who were white women who would only date black guys, period. That was their preference. And they weren't going to change that for anything. Didn't matter how awesome you were. If you were not a black guy, they were not interested in any kind of a relationship with you. And I'm talking about marriage kind of relationships, not just messing around. So it is true that everybody I've ever talked to personally has some kind of a preference for, I prefer these types over this type. Isn't that bigotry? Of course it is. Of course it is. There's no such thing as non-bigoted people by default. It's how we're all wired. We are pattern recognition machines, but we're not good at it. Now, one of the things I would do is, I don't have good examples for you. I would give a person some examples of where we saw a pattern, but it was false. If I had time, maybe I'd describe the Bible code. If I had time, maybe I'd talk about how everybody was sure there was Russian collusion, but it didn't happen. So I'd give a bunch of examples where the person could say, oh yeah, we did think there was a pattern there, but then when we looked into it, we were fooled, there was no pattern. So first you want to so here are the steps, and I'll keep reminding you. First you pace, which is you agree with them. Say, yeah, everybody's bigoted by nature. I agree with you on that. Secondly, then you take them through the fact that we now have a way to use our higher level of reasoning to get past it, to think above it, and we have a way to overcome our default. You also point out that everybody's got a mating preference, because then your bigot will say, oh yeah, that's a good point. I guess everybody's a little bit bigoted, just like me. So pacing is an important part of influence. And once you got there, then you say, what is it about your group, whatever group this bigot belongs to? You say, what is it about your group that's so awesome? You can probably get that person to say, well, let's say it's a neo-Nazi. That person is likely to say something like, well, look at all the things that white people invented. That's a common thing, right? It's like, white people invented this and invented that and invented that. Therefore, the neo-Nazi would say, white people must be pretty awesome. And then here's what I say as I'm reprogramming the bigot out of their bigoted view. I say, but you're not Thomas Edison. Why do you get credit for what Thomas Edison did? What is the logic that connects you to somebody you're not related to and isn't you? How are their accomplishments in any way related to you? These are just different people. Now, you could say that some groups have greater variety. Some groups have more people on the edges. That more geniuses, more more criminals, whatever. You could say there are some groups that have more tail participants, less people in the middle. That might be true. How does that help you? Those are just different people. Those are not you. You didn't invent anything. How can you be proud of strangers' accomplishments? Explain that to me. Now, at this point, because you've paced the person and you've agreed that you're all starting with some, bigoted circuitry, they're sort of with you up to that point, and they're not going to disagree with the statement that they are not Thomas Edison, and that's just a different person. And if you're taking credit for that different person, well, that's not working. Now, then here's the last thing. In my experience, bigots will often, if you take them through any kind of an argument, they'll often default to, I'm just not comfortable around X kind of people. You can walk them through the logic until they just give up on all of that, and they go, okay, that doesn't really apply to me personally. Just the fact that there are other people who are smart, you don't get credit for that. You don't get credit for other people being smart. That's it. Most people will default to, well, but I like my people, and I just want my people to be around me and spend more time with my people. To which I say, have you ever gotten used to something you didn't think you'd like? Because a lot of what we think are our preferences are actually quite fluid. Imagine all the times you thought you wouldn't like something, and then you just were exposed to it for a longer time, then you just liked it. Think about the people in your life that you call your friends. How many of them are basically turds that you just sort of got used to, right? When we spend enough time around other people, we kind of get used to them. It doesn't matter who they are. You could, throw you into a remote tribe somewhere and you say, oh my God, I'm not at all like this remote tribe. But we come back in a year and you're going to be best friends because you get used to people. That's how we're designed. We get used to stuff. So that's the brain hack that I would start. I would seed those ideas, but it's the sort of thing that needs reinforcement. Now, I think there was a time when you could not convince people to be less racist. And that time was before you had so many good role models of people from every ethnicity, every group, every sexual orientation who were succeeding wonderfully. If you had no examples of people succeeding wonderfully, then you might say, well, there's some reason for this, because maybe this group can't have any successful people. But then you say, well, who was our president for 8 years recently? Who are the best athletes you know? Who are the best artists you know? Right? I don't have to go through the list. Black people are just killing it in all over the place. If you look at who is the president focusing on for his criticisms, well, he's focusing on Omar and Tlaib, to which I say, are you kidding me? That's the best news this country has ever had. I hate to be the optimist all the time, but just think about this. The news is that the President of the United States is trading criticisms with two women, people of color. I believe you would use that term for both of them. And it's a fair fight. That's the news. If we were not just so fatalistic, looking at the negative all the time, you'd be looking at the best news this country has ever experienced. The best news this country has ever had is a high-level fight that's a fair fight. Fair fight is the key here. It's a fair fight between the President of the United States and two women who are so successful that they're the headline news, and that what they want and what they care about is what we're talking about. Think about that. Think about, so whether it's a gender issue or a person of color issue, it works the same. That these two women have reached the highest level of effectiveness. You could disagree with what they're saying, of course, But look at the effectiveness. What stopped them? Nothing. What got in the way of them reaching the level that they've reached? What was their obstacle? Nothing. In fact, you could argue that maybe their gender and maybe their ethnicities gave them a boost. Can you think of better news than that? I mean, we like to focus on the drama. We like to focus on blah, blah, blah. They're fighting and blah, blah, blah. Is it racist? Which one's the racist? Is it the president or is it Omar? Who's the racist? So we're sort of arguing on that layer. We're in the weeds, but just take a minute, take a breath, get out of the weeds. Just give yourself some distance from the content of the specific, the Israel stuff, blah, 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 blah. Just rise up a little bit. The headline story in this country is the President of the United States in a fair fight, meaning critical fight, criticisms, with 2 women, people of color. How's that not the best news in the entire United States? Do you feel me? I mean, you could look at this as, bad, but when that's the kind of conversation we're having, don't lose sight that they got there. They got to the show. I talk about Trump. He knows how to put it on a show, and he understands the value of the show. He knows that politics is, it's as much the show as it is the deals and the negotiations and stuff. And Omar and Tlaib and AOC in particular, they get it. They understand the power of the show, and they bring it. So I give tremendous respect to all of those squad members for amazing success in this country, even if you don't like any of their policies. So let's not lose that. And I'm going to end on that note, and I will talk to you later.